What's going on YouTube? CyberOptek here with a brand new video for you today, and in this video we're going to be continuing our series on learning how to make your own custom weapon skins for CSGO. Now, over the past few videos I've concentrated a lot on 3D Coat, primarily because that's the program that I really like to use a lot. However, I have been getting a lot of questions about Blender, and so I thought at this point in the series I might take a step back and show you guys how to create a skin from start to finish using Blender. Now, we did talk about Blender a little bit at the beginning of this series, but it was mainly just how to create templates to move them over into Photoshop. So in this video, I'm going to be walking you through some of the basics. I'm going to show you guys how to create a very simple skin from start to finish using Blender. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to show you guys how to compile all of your UV sheets together in two different programs, both Photoshop and Gimp, because I've been getting a lot of questions about Gimp too. So that's what this video is going to be about. So anyways, let's go. So for this example today, I'm going to be working on the P250, and the reason I chose to work on the P250 is just because there aren't a whole lot of moving parts to it. When you get into some of the bigger weapons like the AKs and the M4s, you'll have a lot more pieces that you have to deal with. But the P250 does not have a whole lot of pieces. And so for the sake of keeping this video short, that's the one I'm going to be using for my example today. So now that I'm inside of Blender, the first thing I want to do is right click on this cube and go to delete. And next I want to import my P250 OBJ. So to do that, I'm going to go to File, Import, Wavefront OBJ, and then we're just going to go find our P250 OBJ. Now, a couple of really quick keyboard shortcuts for those of you who have never used this program before. If you want to free rotate around this weapon, you can do so by clicking in your middle scroll button and moving your mouse around. That will allow you to free rotate around it. If you hold down your shift key and then click in your middle scroll button and move your mouse, you can go left, right, up, or down. And then if you want to zoom in or out, you can just hold down your control button, click in the middle scroll button, and move your mouse up and down. And that's how you would go in and out. So the first thing we want to do is we want to separate this weapon out into individual layers. And there's actually a couple of different reasons for this. Number one kind of goes back to my video where I was talking about alpha channels and wear patterns. If you separate this weapon out into individual pieces, when we go back and put it together later on in this video, you will be able to work on the wear patterns of each part individually. The other reason for separating it and moving the pieces apart is that once we get to the baking process where we're actually adding the colors to these parts, let's say for example, I want to bake a color onto this top piece right here. If this weapon is together as one solid piece, you'll notice on the UV sheet that the outside looks really nice, but the underneath is black. That's because there was no light that was able to get to the underneath of this piece. So it's always a good idea to not only separate these pieces out into layers, but also separate them away from each other as well. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to separate this top slide from the rest of the weapon. So in order to do that, I'm going to select my object. I'm going to hit tab, and then I'm just going to click anywhere in this open area to deselect everything. Next, we're just going to hover over this slide right here, and I'm just going to hit the L button. And as you can see, it has now added this part to my selection. In order to add other parts to the selection, all you simply have to do is just repeat this. Just hover over a piece and click the L button. And as you can see, it will continue to keep adding pieces to your selection. Let's add in all of these little pieces right here. Now, one thing to be aware of on some of these models, let's say, for example, I go to the middle of this piece and hit L. You'll notice that it didn't highlight this one, but it highlighted the one next to it. I run into little wonky things like that sometimes with these models. So it may take a little bit of playing around to get used to it, but eventually you will figure out where you need to hover over these items to actually select them. let's rotate this around. Let's select this piece. Let's select this piece, and then let's go in and add each one of these pieces here. Now I'm hitting L to select them. If I want to deselect, you can hit Shift L while you are hovering over it, and that will deselect each part. So that is another important keyboard shortcut to know. Also another important keyboard shortcut to know, let's say for example, I'm working on this item and I want to take out this indented part in the back, but I want to leave the rest of it. You can go in here and remove individual parts by simply holding down your shift button and then clicking your left trigger. And as you can see, it has now removed this entire background off of this. So if you didn't want that to be part of your design, that's how you would go in and deselect it. So now that we have all of the pieces selected that we want, we're going to hit P on our keyboard and we're just going to select selection right here. And as you can see, it has now added all of these pieces together, and we now have a new layer right here in our menu. So I'm going to double click on this and I'm going to rename this. Let's call this slide and hit enter. Then once we have it renamed, we want to hit tab to go back to object mode. We want to select this item, hit G to move it, and then hit Y to move it along the Y axis. And then just use your left trigger button to drop it. So now, as you can see, I was able to completely remove this slide from the rest of the weapon. Next, I want to go in here and I want to remove these barrel pieces from the item. So we're going to select right here. I'm going to hit tab. I'm going to hover over each piece, hitting L each time to select it. Once I have all of my selections, I'm going to hit P, selection. I'm going to rename this to barrel. Hit enter. Then we're going to hit tab, select this item, hit GY, and move it out. So as you can see, this gets to be pretty easy after a while once you sort of memorize these different shortcuts. Now, one thing you could do, you could just go into Blender and separate out all of these models and then save them off as templates. It will take a lot of time off of these projects. You won't have to come in and do this each and every time if you save off templates. So the next thing I want to do is remove this trigger. So I'm going to select this item here, tab, hover over the trigger, hit L, hit P, selection. I'm going to rename this to be trigger. Hit enter. We're going to hit tab again, select, GY, move it out, left trigger button. Next, I want to remove the top part of this magazine right here. I'm going to leave the bottom part together with this because I want it to be all the same color. Under normal circumstances, I would just remove this part, but just to keep this video short, I'm not going to do that. So let's select this item, hit tab, hover over this piece and hit L, P, selection. Let's call this top mag, enter, tab again. We're going to select this item, hit G and Y, and just move this out. So now, as you can see, I have separated this weapon out into individual pieces, and now we are ready to go and start adding colors to each part of this weapon. So the next thing we want to do is we want to add our colors to this weapon. So in order to do that, I'm going to go right here under my shading tab. Now, the shortcuts that I mentioned earlier, such as clicking in your middle scroll wheel and moving around, all of these will work the same inside of this mode. Just so you are aware of that. The first thing I want to do is I want to add some color to the bottom part of this weapon. So I'm going to select it and I'm going to go right here to this tab, which is your materials property. The first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of this default material that's on it. So right here where it says default OBJ, I'm going to click this minus button. I'm going to click new, and then we're just going to rename this. Let's just call this grip material and hit enter. Now, there are a lot of different things you can do inside of Blender. If you hover down here and you hit Shift A, you'll have all kinds of different things that you can add and nodes that you could connect. We're not really going to dive into that inside of this video, but I will be going a little bit deeper into that in our next video. Right now, the basic controls right here are what I really want you to pay attention to. So first things first, I want to change the base color of this. So I'm going to go to this square right here and click on it. And then we can go in here and sort of play around and get it the color we want. You know, if we wanted it a purple or something, you know, we could do that. Let's make this like a dark black. Down here, you have a lot of different options. So let's say you want to add some metallic to this. You know, maybe we add just a little bit of metallic. If I turn the roughness all the way down, obviously it'll get very mirrored looking. I really don't want a grip to look mirrored like that. So we're going to turn our roughness back up. Actually, let's put that about halfway maybe. And that's pretty much it. You know, that's how you would go in and add a base color. Again, you can sort of play around with these different settings. You have a clear coat that you can add, clear coat roughness. You just kind of have to play around with these a little bit and get this to look the way that you want. The next thing I want to do is I want to add a material to the top part of my magazine here. So I'm going to select it. Again, I'm going to get rid of this default material here. So I'm going to hit this minus. I'm going to hit new. Let's call this mag metal. For this, I think I'm going to make this a light grayish color. And then I'm going to add some metallic to it like so. Maybe take a little bit of the roughness off. Be like that. We're going to make it look shiny. That actually looks pretty good. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to add some color to my barrel. So let's get rid of this default material. Let's go new. Let's call this barrel material. For this one, I'm going to make it very rough. A lot of the metals that you see on barrels and stuff are very rough. So let's make this black. And then let's bump up the roughness on it. Make it really, really rough. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to add some color to the top part of this slide. So I'm going to select it again, get rid of my default color, come up with a new one. Let's call this green metallic. I'm going to select a green color, maybe something in that range, maybe make it a little bit darker because that's a little bit too bright. And then I'm going to add some metallic to it. Kind of give it that shiny look. Maybe come down on the roughness just a little bit. You know, we obviously don't want it to be mirrored. We want it to have a little bit of roughness to it. And that looks pretty good. Now, obviously, I would always separate my trigger out from this slide because this wears a lot faster than this does. So you want to be able to control each one individually. But I also wanted to show you guys this as an example. Let's say that I want my trigger to be the same color as this. And I've gone down here and made a lot of changes, added a bunch of nodes, changed colors and settings over here. Instead of going in and actually trying to recreate this, there's a much easier way to add this color to this part of the weapon. If we select it, right here next to where this says default OBJ, if we go to this drop down, you'll see right here, this is the green metallic material that I've created, and we can just click on it. And now that part is perfectly going to match that part right there. So that in a nutshell is how you go in and just add basic colors to a weapon. Now, as I said before, there are a ton of things you can go in and do in this program. We're not going to have time to go through all of them. I just really wanted to get through the basics today. But that's basically how you go in and add the colors to each individual part of this weapon. The next thing I want to talk about in this video is lighting, and lighting is extremely important whenever you are creating weapons inside of Blender. Now, as you can see, if we click on this second circle right here, We can see what all of our colors look like on the weapon. This actually looks pretty good as is, but this isn't actually how our weapon is going to look like rendered. If we want to see it rendered, we have to go to this last circle right here. And once I click on this, you'll automatically see the problem. This part of the weapon is very well lit up, while all of this is very dark. And if you burn this onto a UV sheet, that's exactly how it's going to look. If we rotate this weapon around, you'll notice that it's completely black on this side. That's because this light is only coming from one side and it's not lighting up the other. Now, some people will duplicate this light and move it around to try to light up the weapon the way that they want it to look. When you get to the point of doing renders for the workshop, for your workshop picture, that'll be very useful, being able to set up lighting to make it look the way you want for your photo. However, when you're doing it for a UV sheet, it's really not the best way to do it. The best way to go about adding light to this weapon would be to use an HDR light. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that real quickly. First and foremost, I'm just going to turn this default light off. I don't even like using it at all. And I'm going to go back to my shading tab. Now, if you do not have any HDR lighting, there is a really cool website. This is called Polyhaven. I will put the link down in the description, but they have a ton of free HDRI lights that you could come in and you can download. Just depending on what you're doing inside of your project, for me personally, I like using a lot of these studio lightings, but maybe you want to use this one right here. That's completely up to you. Definitely download a bunch of these and sort of play around with them and find your favorites. Now, once you have your lighting downloaded, we're inside of our shading tab, I'm just going to go right here where it says object, and I'm going to drop this down to world. I'm going to select this background node and hit X to get rid of it. Then I'm going to hit Shift A, go to texture, environment texture, and then just connect this color output to the surface input of the world input or output right here. Now I want to click this open button. Let's go in and find our HDR lighting. For this example, I'm going to use the Studio Small 09. This is actually one I like to use a lot, and double click on it. Now, if we go back to our render, what you'll notice is that our weapon is completely lit up. You can see lighting on this side of the grip. You can see it on this side. If we rotate this around, you can see that all of the underneath of this slide is lit up. So this is just something very important to know. Whenever you are working on a project like this in Blender, pay really close attention to your lighting, because once you get to the next step, if your lighting is not correct, your weapon will not look good once you get it to the workshop. So the last thing I'm going to show you guys in this video about Blender, we're going to actually bake these colors onto each part of this weapon. In order to do that, though, we're going to have an image texture to be able to burn these colors to. So in order to do this, we're going to go right here and we're going to change this back to object. And then let's start with our grip right here. So with this selected, we want to go down here and hit Shift A, go to texture, and go to image texture, and just add it like so. Then we want to click on new. Let's just give this a name. Maybe we call this UV1. You can name it pretty much whatever you want, whatever's easiest for you to remember. You want to change your width and your height to be 2048 by 2048. So let's change those real quick. Then once we have our name and our width and our height changed, we're just going to click OK. Now we want to add this UV1 onto every single part of our weapon. So while this is selected, I'm going to hit Control C. Then we're going to go to each part of the weapon and we're just going to hit Control V to add it. Go to our slide, hit Control V. Go to our top mag and hit Control V. Now, one thing you notice when I click on this trigger, you'll see that it is already here. That's because this piece and this piece both have the same material on it. So if you have multiple pieces that have the same material, you will not have to add this UV to all of them. So once we have this in here, we're pretty much ready to start baking our UV sheets. So I'm going to go right here to UV editing. We're going to go to this tab right here, the render properties. I want to change my render engine to cycles. I want to change my device to GPU compute. Now, if this is grayed out for you, you can go right here under edit preferences and go to system CUDA, and then you can select your GPU right here. Next, I want to go down here to film and open this up, and we just want to click this transparent button. Then I want to go down here to bake and scroll down, and right here where it says margin, we just want to change this to 0. So now at this point, we're pretty much ready to start baking our UV sheets. So in order to do this, with the grip right here selected, I'm going to go to this drop down and I'm going to select this UV1 that I created. Next, I'm going to go to this bake type, and you want to make sure that this is set to combined. Now, if you were creating a normal map, you would set this to normal. However, when you are doing just colors like this, you want to do this as combined, and then just click bake when you're ready to go. Now that this is finished, you'll notice that I have all of my pieces right here in a nice UV sheet. So the last step at this point, you want to hit Shift Alt S, and then we just want to save this. So let's just call this RIP UV1, save it to our desktop, and click Save Image. Now what you'll want to do is go down through this list, and you'll want to bake for each one of these pieces. So next we would do our slide, our barrel. You know, maybe we'll go ahead and do our barrel real quick, since that one usually goes really fast. Now we'll do the same thing again. We will Shift Alt S, and we will save this one as barrel UV, and so on and so on. So basically, you're just going to repeat this steps for every individual layer that you have for your weapon. So as you guys can see here, these are all of the different UVs that I exported from Blender. The next thing that we want to do is we want to combine these together into a PSD and a TGA file so that we can work on our wear patterns. So first things first, I'm going to open up an instance of Photoshop. Once this opens up, you just want to make sure that your project is 2048 by 2048 and click Create. Then once you have this, you just want to start bringing these files in and dropping them inside of your program, making sure to click outside to deselect it each time you bring in a new piece. Then once we get all of our pieces in here, we just want to go to File, Save, and we just want to save this off as a PSD. So let's just call this Test and click Save. Now, if you guys remember from my video about alpha channels and wear patterns, you also need a TGA file down here. And the way that we did this previously was to go to File, Save As, and right here in this drop down, there would be an option for TGA. Now, I'm not 100% sure why this happens when I import these parts in this way. I do not have a TGA option in this list. So in order to create my TGA, I actually have to do it inside of Gimp. So I'm going to open up an instance of Gimp real quick. I am going to drag each one of these files in here, just like I did with Photoshop. Then once I have my pieces in here, I'm going to go to File, Export As. I'm going to name this Test, but we're going to change our extension to be TGA. Then once I have all of that done, I'm going to click Export here. And then when the box pops up, I'm just going to click Export again. And now, as you can see, it has created my Targa file down here on my desktop. We can just discard that. Now, since I have Photoshop set up as my default, if I double click on this TGA file, you'll notice that it just automatically opens into Photoshop. And then you pretty much can follow the rest of the directions from my wear patterns video. We do want to go into the channels, delete this alpha out of here, and add a new alpha. Then once we have done that, we can save this file and we are pretty much ready to start working on our wear patterns. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is how to use GIMP to create these TGA files. Now, there are actually a lot of positives to using GIMP. First and foremost, this program is 100% free, so you don't have to spend a lot of money on it if you are on a budget. The other big positive to using GIMP is that you don't have to create two separate files like you do with Photoshop. When we're creating our wear patterns in Photoshop, you'll usually do your grayscale values over a PSD file, then you'll copy merged and you'll move them over onto the alpha on your TGA. You don't really have to do that when you're using GIMP. So in order to create our TGA file, the first thing we want to do is go to this top layer here and just right click on it and go to New from Visible. This will create a visible file that has all of these different layers together into one. The next thing you'll want to do is you'll want to right click on this again and go to Add a Layer Mask. Now, there are a lot of different options that come up. Some people will choose white. For me personally, I like to use black. I like to see the transparency of what I'm working on. And I know that the more that I can see an object, the more it's going to wear. So I'm just going to select black and click Add. Now, once I have this, we're pretty much ready to go and start adding our alpha channels. So first things first, I'm going to work on this slide right here. We need to select all of these items. So I'm going to go to my fuzzy select tool and I'm just going to click anywhere in this open area until I get the dancing ants around the outside of all of these pieces. Once this is done, I'm going to turn off this visibility here. I'm going to select my layer mask. I'm going to go to my fill tool. I'm going to go to this color box here and I'm going to select what I want my value to be and click OK. Now, one thing you'll notice when I go in to fill this, you'll see the little circle with the line through it. What you need to do at this point is hit Control-I, move outside and move back inside this object. And now you'll see that I can add a fill to it. And as you can see, it has now added this to this visible layer mask right here. So next, let's do our top mag here. I'm going to turn it on and select it. Use my fuzzy select tool, click anywhere outside. I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to select my layer mask here. I'm going to go to my fill tool and then I'm going to hit Control-I and just fill inside. Now, one thing, if you notice that parts are wearing too fast or too slow, the way that you come in and you change this is basically to come back to this part again, select it, go up here, change your color. Maybe we want this to be a little bit darker and click OK. Then select our fill tool, come back over the top of it and click it. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that you can't see it any longer. It's gotten a lot more opaque. And that means that it's actually going to wear less. So the more opaque this is, the less it's going to wear. So that's pretty much it. That's how you go about adding these alpha channels to these different parts inside of GIMP. Once you get done, you'll want to come to File, Export As. You'll want to change your file extension to be TGA, and then you can use VTF Edit to create your VTF file for the workshop. So this concludes my video on the basics of creating a skin inside of Blender. Now, obviously, this program is a monster. There is so much to know about this program. I mean, we didn't even go into textures and sculpting and, there's so many different things to talk about. Obviously, I couldn't do them all in one video, but over the next few videos, we'll dive a little bit deeper. I'll show you guys some other cool tricks that you can do inside of Blender to kind of help your designs out to push them to that next level. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you would, please leave likes or comments down below. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm always glad to answer them. And as always, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button because it really helps this channel out a lot. Anyways, thank you guys so much and we'll see you in the next video.